just took the consequences. New Mexico. He's not on a team or a member of a gang. He's Cactus Jacko, better known than the Bang Bang. Other people everywhere seem to think he's crazy, but the man that came from the mean streets knows his mind ain't hazy. Broken bones on a concrete floor are really more his thing. That's why he's known all over the world as Mr. Bang Bang. Bang Bang. Look out.
I didn't know you were a Fresca guy.
Oh,
I'll have that on hand every time for you now.
And whenever I watch Caddyshack and Ted Knight says, "How about a Fresca?" I think, that sounds so good. Not that I watch Caddyshack often, but when I do.
It's a great line.
It's a great line. How about a Fresca?
You know, another great line is Mr. in your house. And can you believe we turned it into a shirt? A Mr. in your house shirt.
You know who I feel bad for at this juncture in time? Stone Cold. Because all of a sudden that Austin 316...
Second place.
Very much secondary. Yeah, and I know about secondary because I'm the number one name in secondary pay-per-views.
And you got the shirt to prove?
I got the shirt. I was seriously thinking, now I believe I'm going to be cremated when the time comes, but this may be reason to rethink that just so I can have that tell me,
on a headstone?
On a headstone, here lies Mr. in your house.
With that logo.
No one came through bigger when it mattered less. Is that not great? That's an epitaph for the ages. Yeah. No one came through bigger when it mattered less.
I mean, we have to put that on a shirt.
All right.
Next time.
Maybe the back of this shirt.
Maybe the back of that one. Yeah. So, boy, we're starting off dark here. Where are you going to have the ashes spread, or you just want to be on a mantle somewhere?
Well, I've not asked the people at Santa's Village how they would feel about the Foley ashes being scattered, but that would be one. That'd be a main contender. Maybe just at 3 or 4 of the parks that meant a lot to me when I was a child. Throw in a little Knoebels Grove because what it's meant to my children. And maybe we'll see if Vince would let me drop the ashes in the ring before the main event of WrestleMania.
I love that.
Wouldn't that be great?
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. Forget leaving, the Undertaker left his hat and gloves. Let's just leave me.
Leave some ashes. Well, I think in keeping with the Mr. in Your House theme, it should be maybe
Backlash.
Before the third match.
Maybe the Undertaker could climb to the top of the stone, throw you off one last time.
That's right.
I mean, why not? King of the Ring, one last time.
Maybe there's some room there where we can investigate.
I love it. Well, let's talk about something that I've really been excited about talking about because I don't think a lot of fans are familiar with this part of your career. We're going to be going back and talking about really what a lot of people refer to as like the birth of independent wrestling. Long gone are the traditional territory days. The AWA is really on its last leg. Yeah. It's down to the WWF versus WCW. But meanwhile, something in Philadelphia was growing. And when Jim Crockett Promotions is bought out by Ted Turner, became WCW, Vince McMahon essentially just ran everybody out of the game. And all that's left are a handful of these promoters who are really super fans who want to try to put their hands on the wheel. And the first name we're going to be talking about today is the guy who stood out above all the rest, Joel Goodhart.
Joel Goodhart.
A lot of our listeners may not be familiar with that name. Tell us about Joel and how you came to be introduced to him.
Well, I met Joel, I believe, on a couple of occasions before Tri-State Wrestling. I think Joel did some appearances, fan club things. I know there was one day I couldn't make it to Philadelphia. For an appearance, travel or something of that nature. I came back, made up on the date. My wife was with me. I was wearing a green and blue striped sweater, and my wife just she looked out of this world. And it was so I knew Joel even before he did Tri-State Wrestling. But when he opened it up, it was pretty much the precursor to ECW.
Yeah.
It was, it was really wild. Todd Gordon was one of Joel's financial people. He saw what Joel was doing. He liked it. When Joel ran out of finances, and obviously ECW was different to Tri-State. especially in that ECW. They were bringing in top name talent to groom the younger guys, to legitimize the younger guys, whereas Joel's Tri-State, they banked on those names bringing people in. They weren't necessarily there to bring up the younger guys. Not that they were there to squash them, but they were there to draw on their own. And how they made money is beyond me, because the talent budget had to have been astounding. They were flying in 10, 12 guys, big names. And it became a destination. It became the place to go to if you were a big-time independent fan.
Before we talk more about Joel, some of our listeners probably don't know the name Todd Gordon. Sort of, in your perspective, who was Todd and what was his contribution?
Well, Todd was the owner of ECW.
Eastern Championship.
Eastern Championship Wrestling, before that fateful night when the... things changed.
August 27th, 1994, Shane Douglas threw the belt down.
That's right. I think after he did some great damage to it, right? Tried to damage it in some way.
Well, I think he just cut a promo about it, about how the NWA was dead.
Yeah.
And it no longer represented this and this. This is a new era. And ECW became Extreme Championship Wrestling. But Todd Gordon was the original owner of that outfit. And
right.
I think he has... maybe this is the inappropriate term, but it's a jewelry store, but I think he does some pawn stuff. He'll buy estate jewelry and things like that.
It would be considered a really high-end pawn shop.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, they're dealing with some really high-value pieces of jewelry. And I'm sure they've got the guitars and things, other things that but it was really
jewelry type stuff, not lawnmowers and VCRs.
Right, yeah.
Either way, Joel is going to start running some shows in the Northeast, making a home base in Philadelphia. He's a guy who's drawing 1,400 to 2,000 people, and in this era, boy, WCW is running some shows where there's 200, 300, 400 fans, so that's getting everyone's attention. But he's bringing in guys like Larry Zbyszko, taking on David Sammartino, but David has Bruno in his corner. So that is clearly a big price tag. He's got Tully Blanchard versus Bam Bam Bigelow in a steel cage match. He's got Kerry Von Erich taking on Jerry Lawler for the USWA title. I mean, this is a pretty big-time opportunity. And you've actually worked a little bit in this era for the UWF and your old pal there, Mr. Abrams.
Oh, yeah.
I think after Vice's Dark Side of the Ring, more people are familiar with him, but briefly describe who Mr. Abrams was and what a character he was.
Herb Abrams was a visionary. I don't think he got to follow through on that specific vision, but he was able to make people believe in his vision, which is that he was going to use some of his Hollywood magic to become competition for WWE. And I was at the press conference when he talked about it. I was at the John Arezzi weekend of, I don't think it was called the John Arezzi Weekend of Champions, the Weekend of Champions.
The first ever wrestling convention.
Yeah. And it was amazing, like the names he brought in.
Including Flair.
It was Flair, it was Sting, it was Bruno, it was Funk, me, and maybe one or two other people. You didn't need 100 names at that time. It wasn't WrestleCon. It was, 5 super big names, and then I just had that little run with WCW. I was honored to be part of that group, but nobody had seen anything like that. So they flocked out for that weekend. It was a great event, and it was there that I met Herb Abrams. Again, I had my wife with me. My wife, who was my girlfriend then, traveled all over the place with me before we had kids, and we both believed in him, He asked me if I'd be interested in being part of this thing. He went up there. I think he led off with by praising me, led off his press conference by talking about how Ole Anderson was nuts to let me get away. And I don't recall hearing that Blackjack Mulligan was going to be his booker, because Mulligan was behind bars at that time. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I don't believe he said that Brody was going to work for him, because that was an impossibility.
Since he had passed away. But he did not come across like a guy who was out of his mind. He had Spivey and B. Brian Blair as two of his biggest stars, and they got into a little something there, which you kind of, had to do to introduce a new product.
And we thought we were off to the races, and I thought that way until I showed up at Reseda. No, I don't want to say Reseda Country Club because that might be where Johnny Lawrence was. That where Johnny Lawrence? Yeah, checking with my man Grillo over there.
Are you doing Karate Kid references?
Karate Kid references.
Okay.
Was that the Reseda Country Club? All right, it was somewhere around there, but it felt to me like it had a posh name.
Yeah.
But it didn't strike me as the ideal place to be holding wrestling. And we didn't know what Herb was bringing to the table as far as being an announcer. I don't want to speak ill of those who are no longer with us. He wasn't good, Conrad.
Yes.
He wasn't good.
A little over the top.
A little over the top. And Bruno, he would probably would have been better served with a real comedic mind next to him to kind of put him in his place.
Right.
Bruno was the ultimate straight man, and he brought a great credibility to the product. But it was a stretch because Herb brought in Bruno, but Herb represented pretty much everything Bruno was against.
Yeah.
He was ridiculously over the top. I know we don't want this. We could do a whole show on Herb,
sure.
But I mean, his first merchandise out of the gate was a Mr. Electricity Herb Abrams T-shirt, like not the guys, but the announcer. And then for anyone who's watched, I believe it was the Cocaine Cowboy edition of Dark Side of the Ring, he had cookies coming out. And there was like a Paul Orndorff cookie and a Steve Dr. Death Williams cookie, and then coming soon, Herbie cookies. Like, yeah, that's
what everybody wants.
That's what everybody wants. So he was a character. My wife got it right away that he was using some substances because she was, 5 years older than me, had been around the clubs in New York, and she knew how to spot one when she saw one, and she was like, this guy's so coked out. Really? Like, I didn't know. I never tried. Never have to this day. Didn't know that much about it. But he was, Brian Blair had one of the great lines. He said, Herb Abrams died doing what he loved, hookers and cocaine.
I think you had the best line. If Mr. Abrams was here today, what would he be doing?
Time.
I just wanted to bring that up because, I don't feel like we can talk about Joel without at least drawing some sort of a comparison, good or bad. I'm sure they're way different. But Joel Goodhart's trying to do maybe the same thing that Mr. Abrams was, but it feels like this at least had, what we're going to talk about today with Goodhart, had the respect of the hardcore fans.
It really did. Yeah, because Herb threw a lot of great names. I mean, that's where I originally met Andre the Giant. Was in Herb's dressing room.
What a coup that was! He
was bringing in huge names. I mean, his roster from top to bottom was really impressive, and then he wanted to push some younger guys, of which I was one of them. But you're right. The product kind of pushed away the hardcore fans.
Yeah.
And this one welcomed them. Like, it's a great tent, the wrestling fandom. And we get all these little niches, and it's great that there's something for everyone. Don't like WWE product? Guess what? There's 18 other things to choose from if you like. But Joel put something for everyone out there. The same way that ECW did, even though they were known as the
Blood and Guts. They weren't really just that.
Yeah. You could count on a great technical match and fans who would appreciate that. And Joel's was kind of the same way. They skewed a little bit heavy on the blood and guts, especially on their big shows.
Yeah.
Not so much on the, not as much. It was still there on the house shows. But on their big shows, they went pretty heavy, and I was a part of that.
So we know Todd's background being in the jewelry business, and we know Mr. Abrams was in the, plus-size ladies wear business. And
I'm a big girl now, I believe. That's a great name, yeah.
Great name.
As two plus-size men, we can appreciate
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm for it. What was Joel's background?
I don't really know.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting that we're all like, hey, what's going on here? I wanted to set the stage here. We're September of 1990. Eddie Gilbert's working an angle with Jerry Lawler in Memphis, and it's a pretty legendary angle. Eddie hits Lawler with a car on live TV.
That's good.
And this became a tape trading legend. Like, way back when, you couldn't just reach in your pocket, pull out your phone, and find any match in the world. There were these little underground trading communities.
Sure.
I was a part of that.
I was too.
But the idea that, wait a minute, somebody got hit by a car? I got to see this.
It looked good too.
Yeah. So what was your reaction seeing or hearing that?
A good friend of mine, Brian Hildebrandt, who later refereed as Mark Curtis and was Jimmy Cornette's right-hand man in Smoky Mountain. He refereed and was a heck of a hand in the ring. He had a chance to do some wrestling with Randy Hales when Memphis took on Smoky Mountain. But Brian was like another teacher in the ring. He was a wrestling historian, loved the Memphis stuff. So Brian would have showed that to me. And I would have thought it was really cool. I would have been a little envious.
I was going to say, that feels like you all day.
To tell you the truth, I never had a chance to be run over by a car, but I...
What a sentence. I've never had the chance to be run over by a car. You know, I mean, we're right here on the Parkway. We could make it happen, but it's not advisable.
I'm an older man now.
Okay.
I'm an older
Good.
man. But Jerry, man, I don't think people realize what a great worker Jerry Lawler was and what a great bump taker Jerry was. By the time he got to WWF or WWE, you know, he was a middle-aged man by that point. And still a heck of a worker, but he wasn't taking the bumps, you know. There was
Hulk Hogan never got hit by a car.
Right. Hulk Hogan never was run over by a car, brother. But there's another great bump he took with Joss LeDuc, and I think it kept Lawler out for a while. Lawler, he rarely got injured. So but I have to believe he was banged up a lot of that time. This was just like it was such a severe contusion that he couldn't walk. I believe that was it. If we have a clip of that, it was LeDuc throwing Lawler from the ring onto the announce table, and it didn't conveniently break.
This is not the Spanish announce
table.
Yeah,
man, brother. This thing was real solid, and Lawler hit it on the corner. I think it did a number on him. But he was out on the cutting edge of bump taking. And he had a guy in Eddie who idolized him.
Yeah.
Who was a protege, but who also, I think, was always... I'm not saying he didn't have Jerry's respect. I'm just saying that respect meant so much to Eddie, and he loved working with Jerry. So when I first worked with Eddie says, listen, I'm a heel, talking about himself. He wants to stay a heel, so it puts me in the rather new position of being a babyface. And I go out there for that first match, and I cut an awful promo. This is why I think it's important for people to look at this stuff and realize that it's a learning process. I'm ashamed to see it, but I'm glad it's there. I think I was wearing some cornrows for only one of 2 times in my life, and the promo was worse than the match. The match wasn't anything. It wasn't bad, but it was not a harbinger of the stuff that Eddie and I would go on to do. Like, I hadn't found my comfort zone at all in trying to be like a babyface. And then, I was a babyface throughout the duration of our program, but I grew into it, and I learned during that time with Eddie to feel things. Instead of going out there and just doing them because they were supposed to be done, to learn to feel it instead of just concentrating on replicating it.
Did you learn a lot of that in Memphis?
Well, in Memphis, Memphis was a unique learning situation. I mean, I wrote about Memphis and how I did not enjoy it, but then I later went on to realize it was a great learning experience. You learned every day. The nature of the territory meant you had to be constantly changing up your matches because you were in the same venue every week. You were in the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis every Monday. You were at I'm not calling it the Yum Yum Center no matter what. It was the Louisville Gardens on Tuesday. Evansville they had a name for an arena, but it was a small venue on a Wednesday, and every Saturday night was Nashville. TV, Memphis, Saturday morning, drive to Nashville, which was about a 200-mile drive.
It's a good drive.
It's a hike. So you put on a lot of miles. You didn't make much money. And it, for me at least, as a northerner, I was kind of ground down. It was really valuable because there were guys like Robert Fuller who did believe in me, and I remember specifically, all right, I like how this feels. Like, I'm not saying that there were just a few people went out of their way to make life a little more difficult for me than it needed to be, and I remembered that as well. So it was a really valuable learning tool as far as how to treat people. But
you don't have to give any names if you don't want to, but can you give an example?
Well, man. Well, I got caught talking to a girl in a wheelchair who had muscular dystrophy, and
You're a heel.
I'm a heel.
You're not supposed to be nice to people,
right? So my job was threatened, and this is. I mean, I wrote this about Randy Hales, and Randy and I have mended fences a long time ago, and I'm grateful for the opportunity he gave me. But he had that talk with me about how many letters he got per day, and he sees one of his heels out there talking to a fan. And so the irony of the situation is that I did go on to be good friends. Terry DePriest was the young lady's name, and she passed away in 1991 and was one of my best friends by the time she passed away. So that family kind of took me in. I had Thanksgiving at their house in November of 1988, and Gary Young and I had I don't know if it was that week or within a few weeks, because we were gone shortly after Thanksgiving from the territory, and gorgeous Gary Young and I won the tag team titles. So at that time, well, let me just give you her answer before I explain what the process was at that time. I stay over her house after the show on Wednesday night, and got the title belt, and I say, I bet you were surprised to see Gary and I win those titles. She goes, not really. I heard you won them the last night, 2 nights also. Because at that time, you would not just win it once. You would win the titles
in every town.
In every town.
Until TV.
That they ran regularly. And then they wouldn't say which town you won it in. So each crowd thought that by the design was each crowd is supposed to believe they're seeing the title change, but the fans talk to each other even before the day of the air. And they won it last. So the idea of not smartening up the fans,
they figure it out because you did it.
They figure it out quickly, and I think on the list of offenses, I would say that switching titles in 4 different cities is a more major offense than talking to a young lady in a wheelchair.
I would agree.
Yeah. So, but kayfabe was still in. You still wanted your bad. This is a talk Skandor Akbar had with me in 1989 in World Class, that I was somebody who was nicer to the fans than they wanted, especially in a place like World Class where you're hitting that same venue, Sportatorium, every Friday night, every Saturday.
You got to be hateable.
Yeah, they get to know you, and and plus you can sense these things. So that was a knock on me, that I was too nice to the fans, and there was something in what Randy was saying, but it's still, I think, less of an offense. And now it's something that's completely understood and encouraged.
Yes.
If you're in WWE and you're in AEW, you take your time out of your day to spend with somebody who's been struggling their whole life.
Unless you're MJF, because you're just a despicable human being. Seriously, a few years ago at StarCast, we saw him bless out a kid in a wheelchair.
I know.
And I was like, wow, okay.
I see those things. I'm like, it's...
The kid loved it.
And I saw...
He gets it.
He gets it, but I'm not sure everyone gets it.
No, there were people who were really offended all around.
Yeah, and I just don't know if you're as talented as you are, Look, the days when Abdullah the Butcher, I used to get a flight with Abdullah, and a flight attendant would come over, and Abdullah would get these eyes, like
he would do it to her too.
He would do it, and she would go to check, and then the woman would just withdraw and walk away as quickly as you could. And Abby's idea was, that's how you get over it. You spread the word, one by one, that person's going to talk to somebody else. So in I got to World Class in 1988. And you'd have fans who would follow you up the aisle. They would come out of their seats and follow you to the dressing room. So auditorium is largely a building made out of corrugated tin. And so the tin would be up on the roof, the walls, everything. And so I knew if I headbutted the corrugated tin, I would put huge dents into it. But every 6 inches, you don't have the corrugated tin. You have hard beams. And so probably 4 times out of 5, I would succeed in putting a dent in the sportatorium. And
the fifth one was for
out
you.
of 5, it would ring my bell. No doubt in my mind at the time that was a ratio that was worth following up on, because those people were going to go back to their the other people there, and say, this guy just put a huge dent in that thing. And that was just the way business was conducted. One by one, the word gets out. So I appreciate in some ways that he wants to be the consummate heel. I'm just
not capable.
Nah, kid's 10 years old. I don't know if you need to say your dad should have worn a condom. I don't know if that goes down well with everyone. I guess you could argue at this point you know what you're signing up for, but I don't know if everybody does.
Right.
So I like the guy. I've only met him on one occasion. He was great. I realized he had a world of talent. I thought what was going to hold him back was that I didn't know if he could assert himself as a tough guy. And he's certainly done that. So all those questions have been answered. And when his contract comes up, I'm sure that he would be a major jewel in the crown. And Mr. McMahon, and of course Tony Khan's going to try to.
He's
keep
getting
him.
big offers from everybody.
Yeah. But he doesn't. I don't think he needs that. I don't think he needs to write FU on a $400 title belt. Just me thinking. But then again, I'm the guy who talked to a girl in a wheelchair in 1988.
Well, so let's talk about Eddie Gilbert.
Okay, yeah.
You're with him in Memphis. You didn't love your Memphis experience, but
I was not with Eddie in Memphis.
Oh, you never had any time there with him?
I didn't get to know. I got to know Eddie before that in '86. This is when UWF, a little history lesson, people out there, geography lesson. Bill Watts' Mid-South had just become UWF because they recognized that they had a popularity way beyond their oil town hotbed. And that was really important because that business, oil business, was undergoing a big slump, and attendance was dropping. You really needed the business, the oil business to be booming to make the best out of your wrestling company. So he had, I think, 120 syndicated stations and a great, really exciting TV show that Jim Ross announced. It was cutting edge. It was great storytelling. One led into another. There's a word that
episodic.
Episodic. There you go. I'm ashamed. 5-time New York Times best-selling author, and 2 of them hit #1, and I couldn't come up with episodic. I was going with encyclopedic, but I knew it wasn't encyclopedic. But he had his show, Bill Watts shows were really exciting.
Oh yeah.
And so, in an attempt to branch out and test the waters of those territories that the show was reaching, but was not traditionally a Mid-South area, they were branching out to Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. That was and sure there were a lot of other places they were reaching out to as well, but that was my experience, that we were doing some shows. And so I think in November of '86, Eddie came over with Missy. Terry Taylor came over. Buddy Jack Roberts came over. I think Chris Adams came a couple months later, 2 or 3 months later, when we ran some other towns. But those were the first people we met. And to get this type of feedback from Eddie Gilbert, right? I think Eddie was like an assistant booker there at Mid-South. And to get the feedback coming off the matches I was having with Shane, that we were guys that had a future. To be taken under the wing of not only Eddie, but Buddy Roberts, that was a big deal, right? Yeah. That was a big deal. And it was really to get that kind of feedback. DiNucci wasn't a big back patter, right? And he wasn't a guy who gave compliments lightly. But when Shane and I came back from our first match, Dominic would have us on first to set the tone. And he said, these guys can go anywhere in the world with that match. And that was a big compliment.
Yeah.
And so we really started believing that we had what it took to be somebody. If we were good enough to wrestle in Mid-South, which Shane, or UWF, which Shane later did, but I did not, but largely because of a mishap I had with Sam Houston in a match that Sam and I still talk about every time we see each other. Do you know the mishap?
I do not, no.
So word's getting around, and we'll get back into Eddie, but I've been given the opportunity. I think this is by the third time that UWF is running the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia area, coming off a match I had with Chris Adams in Ohio. I'm trying to think of the name of the town. Hopefully it'll come to me. It was one of these moments where, even though I talk in my show about the first time I hyperventilated being during my tryout match with WCW in '89 with the Steiner brothers, I came close to hyperventilating against Chris Adams when I had him in a rear chinlock, because the crowd was getting with it in a way I'd never experienced. I only had a few years then, and Chris Adams was a great worker. I think in the bigger scheme of things, he's really unheralded. But he specifically asked to work with me because he'd seen me working with Shane. He wanted to see, not just see what I could do, he wanted to give me that opportunity to show what I could do. And he and I had a great, maybe you watch it now, maybe it's not great by the standards of today, but in the terms of, drop down, get it again, get your heat, work up to the big finish. It was the best match I'd ever had. And so they put me in a singles match with Sam Houston in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Big venue. Maybe there's only 1,000 people there in a 6,000-seat venue, but that's still a good crowd. And Sam and I did not have the opportunity to talk. That's going back to Memphis. That was one of the great things about that territory, is that there were places like the auditorium in Nashville, wasn't the auditorium, it was Fairgrounds, Nashville Fairgrounds, where you did not see your opponent beforehand, and you had to come up with a match in the ring that wasn't like the match you had the week before. And you don't have the classic matches, right? But you learn on the fly, baptism of fire type of thing. So that's a situation I was in with Sam. I don't have a chance to talk to him. I knew Michael Hayes just a little bit from the tour they had done a month or two earlier, and I said, do you have any suggestions about working with Sam? He goes, women love the guy. He fights up from underneath. So, if you have a chance during your heat, put him in a bear hug. So I've got bear hug in my mind.
Right.
And Sam and I are working well together. And then I get over that bear hug, and sure enough, the fans start to get with it. Sam's fighting him up from underneath. No. Before I put him in the bear hug, I call bear hug. I'm getting my heat. I call bear hug, shoot him into the ropes. And as Sam is on his way, he says to me, watch the elbow. He may have said duck the elbow. And I remember vividly thinking, like, I'm shooting him off. I hear it, and I'm thinking to myself, watch it do what? I don't know. Like, I don't have the reps in, to hear these things.
You're not familiar with that term yet.
Right. I'm not familiar with watch it. He may have said duck it. And suffice to say, Sam comes off the ropes with an elbow that misses me by this much, and I took a bump. Big bump. And I just felt my heart, go down to my stomach. And I sensed then I just blew my opportunity. Now, I got on him, I got some heat. We went home. But I was just kind of despondent. I went out, whatever little hotel, nightclub was there. And I was just down, really down. And Brian Hildebrandt, Mark Curtis, was trying to cheer me up by telling me the story about a battle royal where a guy's expecting a kick to the back of the head. There's only two men in the ring. A fan throws a box of popcorn, hits the guy in the head. He thinks it's the kick. He takes a bump over the top. And it's funny, but it doesn't necessarily make me feel better.
Yeah.
And I would say that one move cost me that opportunity. So that would have been 87. I'm still in college at that time. But I'd say it cost me a year. I think.
Set you back a year.
I think it set me back a year. Yeah. So
what happened with the bear hug? You were telling that. And
I did put the bear hug on after that, and he did fight up, and the people got with it. But clearly, when a guy sells an elbow, man, my heart goes out to guys. I'm not a fan of the botched things, because first of all, I don't like to see people laugh at injuries. You know, like that guy who comes off the second or top rope and he just compound fractures.
Oh, it's awful.
It's like, oh man, God, I think there is a disclaimer, but I hate to see that type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't find any humor in it, and it's funny to see guys mess up moves if you know it's not going to affect their livelihood.
But if it hurts their career, it's not good.
Yeah, if they're devastated by it and it sets them back not only a year, but in some case, you know, somebody, you may remember what that guy has done 10 years after the fact. You know, so-and-so. Well, Rocky Balboa says they don't remember you. They remember the rep. He's talking about Little Marie, who hangs out by the Atomic Hoagie shop. So they don't necessarily know you. They know the rep. They remember you as that guy who messed up that move. So that was a devastating setback.
It's also how you respond to it, though. I'll never forget, live on Raw, you're in the ring with Rock. His sunglasses fly off. That's not planned.
Yeah.
You immediately improv and make the botch hysterical.
Put it on his head. The Rock thanks you for that.
It's tremendous.
And then it wasn't shown on SmackDown. You would have seen it in a clip after the fact. And at the time, I know we're jumping decades here, generations even, but what we were looking for out of that program with the Rock and Sock connection was for the Rock to embrace me, not physically, but all right.
Warm up to the idea.
Warm up to the idea, and then once I gain his trust, boom, I'm going to turn on him. Two things happened. One, it took off to an extent that none of us would have thought on paper.
People loved it.
To the point where people still talk about it. That was 24 years ago.
And it wasn't that long.
Yeah, we didn't run that long. So the idea that the Rock and Sock connection are up there on WWE's top 10 list of tag teams.
It's hysterical.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's like Rock and Roll Express. They're still together, right?
40 years.
Yeah, yep. Road Warriors, Midnights, and then there's Rock and Sock. We're together for
8 weeks.
Yeah, 8 weeks. But we were also looking for that moment where Rock would, embrace me. And so when that happened, I was like, here's the moment. This is the moment. In my head, I thought that to myself. Then I watched the show when it comes out a couple of days later, and it's not there. I can't remember who I asked. They said, we didn't think that would be good for The Rock's character. I was like, this is exactly what we were looking for. And so it probably cost me one or two really good pay-per-view payoffs in that we didn't do the turn, but I just felt like what I was getting from the fans was so real.
Yeah.
Like that turn, the kinder, gentler Mankind was resonating with people. And had I known that there was a route that Shawn Michaels, he kind of carved out that swath for the short-term heel turn, which is the primary reason why I ended up doing the heel turn with Edge in 2006, is like people are going to forget quickly. They'll embrace me back as a babyface. I'll do this little run. I'll have fun with it. But at the time, what I was doing felt so real that I felt like I'd be betraying the fans in a bad way.
Right.
Not in a good way to get heat, but in we wanted this. We wanted this, and you took it away from us.
So let's talk about you and Eddie opening the show September 15th, Penn Hall in Philadelphia. Meltzer would report it was a one-star match and disappointing. Eddie defeated you for the win after the hot shot. Do you remember this match? Was it a disappointment?
Yeah, it was a disappointment. Look, Eddie and I was going to say that I didn't see Eddie after UWF until Joel, but I did. Eddie was
three times at WCW,
yeah,
right?
WCW, and I believe we had good matches. A
couple TV tapings and a house show, I think.
Yeah, and one of the TV tapings in particular I thought was a really good match. So it was disappointing. I wasn't sure where I lead it off with an awful promo. It was. I don't know. I don't have an excuse for it. Certainly wasn't Eddie's fault.
Well, you're not the seasoned vet yet. You're finding your voice still.
I've got 5 years in, and I'd worked with guys. Like I said, I had the experience in Memphis where I've worked people I haven't talked to. I've got some experience in working with people who don't even speak English. Not talking about Japanese wrestlers yet, but talking about a couple of wrestlers from the Middle East, where you're not seeing them, you don't even understand them, and their understanding of you is not 100%. I don't want to say it's minimal, but not 100%. So I don't want to offer that up as an excuse, because I thought I'd worked at that point 3 territories. When you're in world class and you're working every week at the Sportatorium, I should have done better. I was new to the babyface thing, and this is before I realized, the best way to be a good, effective babyface as a character is to embrace that same character you were as a heel, and do the same things people liked enough about you as a heel to kind of turn you.
Don't change it all.
Right, don't change it all. And here I was trying to be Ricky Steamboat. I think I may have thrown in an arm drag. Yeah, Ricky Steamboat with cornrows. So it was.
Did you lose a bet? Why did you have cornrows? Did you go to Jamaica with the wife? What was the deal?
No, I think I had a friend who I helped train named Sonny Blaze. And we went off somewhere to do a show, and he knew someone who did hair, and so I can't remember. I had the whole thing done. When I met Herb Abrams, I had like 4 rows done.
I remember
and I believe I even had like little teddy bears, which you're asserting your masculinity. If you don't care that you're wearing teddy bears in your cornrowed hair, like you don't care about too much, as far as what people think of you stylistically. I think I may have had this was all decked out, so it was considerable amount of time went into this, but I think again it was Sonny Blaze's friend who did it.
So you're brought back out later in this same show because Manny Fernandez hasn't arrived at that point, and they want you to take on Abdullah the Butcher. In reality, Manny was booked somewhere else that night. He's late arriving in the building, so you're just going to sort of be the stand-in until Manny gets there.
Right.
And according to Meltzer, you bleed buckets with Abdullah the Butcher, and then eventually Manny comes in, and it's a brawl all over the building. Boy, this is independent wrestling at its finest, is it not? Okay, I know you're not scheduled to be in there.
Yeah.
But that guy's coming. He's just not here yet. Just go bleed for him a little bit.
I was wearing a UWF shirt, I believe, that day. And I had the cornrows. I don't think it was buckets, but it was substantial. And it was more in playing to my strengths. That if I'm going to be the babyface, then bring in these hallmark bumps. Even if not hallmark bumps, it wasn't like I had 2 or 3. Like I could turn just about any bump into something special. Even something as simple as a shoulder tackle becomes something pretty devastating if Abdullah the Butcher's doing it to you on concrete.
Yes.
So Abby and I had worked together in WCW when I was part of Sullivan's Slaughterhouse. He came in as Norman the Lunatics guy, and so it was Norman, Abby, and Mike Rotundo. Here's a strange pairing against me, Kevin, and may have been Bigelow at that point. But at house shows and tape shows alike, one of our spots was I come running full speed. 100% to Abby, boom, I take that bump, and people know it hurts. They can hear it. They can hear the thud against Abdullah. They can hear the thud in the concrete. So that was a pretty big bump. It was basic, but it was big and it was believable.
The show itself has 1,500 fans here in Philadelphia. That's a $22,000 gate. That's nothing to sneeze at back then. Just for comparison, the NWA ran a show that very same night in Waco, Texas, with the Southern Boys versus the Freebirds. They had 130 fans.
130 fans in Waco?
Yep. The Cobo Arena in Detroit had Sting taking on Ric Flair. 1,000 fans.
1,000 fans?
So you guys are not a joke when it comes to drawing.
Right.
So I realize that maybe the finances aren't in order, but you're certainly putting together a product that more fans want to see, even than the NWA, and even more than the Freebirds and the Southern Boys, which is pretty crazy. That Goodhart show had Lawler and Terry Funk on top.
In what type of match does it say?
I'm not sure.
Because I don't want to...
He was the king of the gimmick matches here. We're going to talk about that, but it was one after another.
It was one after another, and I do remember the fans bring weapons match. So it was like... it was more or less a lumberjack match where fans were the lumberjacks with weapons. And let's just say the fans learned to embrace the idea of using the weapons on Lawler. more than they did Terry Funk, because the first time they throw Terry out, he gets hit. Well, I can't remember what kind of weapons they had, but Terry's got a weapon of his own, that huge left hand. And I think the first time he dropped somebody, I don't know if he dropped him or if he just swung, that was a message to all those fans that they were going to stay as far away from Terry as possible. So fans with weapons, anytime Funk throws Lawler over, they go to Lawler, do a little something, rolling back in. Anytime they throw Terry Funk out, those fans with the weapons, they kept their distance. So there was only the one time where they dared come in because they knew they were going to get hit.
Yeah.
They've signed their disclosure, whatever they signed, the legal thing, and so legally Terry can rough these guys up. And I think it took was one person to get that message. And
they never did that again.
Never did that again.
Well, as you were sort of alluding to, Joel as a promoter, he's not believing in traditional wrestling formats. The card doesn't build to something chaotic. Match one is chaos.
Yeah.
That sets the tone for the whole show. And you're booked regularly from that point on, and you refer to him in your book as your most consistent booker at the time. Because
he was running house shows, and I'm glad that Joel saw something in me. It would have been easy to just discard me after that one-star match. I thought we were getting close to two-star territory. I just got to tell you, I think could have thrown us an extra half a star.
I don't want to ask a personal financial detail, but are you getting paid more based on the gimmick match, or is it a flat rate? You're going to do the same thing every time?
I was making $250 a night, $250 a night, and then it got bumped up when I did the
craziness.
Well, no, when I did the 3 matches in one night.
Okay,
I ended up being paid, probably triple, probably $750.
So it's not more if it's more violent; it's more if it's more matches.
Yeah, and he thought I deserved. He thought I deserved it.
Sure,
that was clearly the biggest payoff I'd received. I think even taking into account WCW house shows, I probably got $1,500 for a pay-per-view at that time. And my apologies to WCW if it was $1,000 more. It may have been. But as far as house shows, I went out there. I remember asking some people. I think I would have consulted with Bill Apter and a couple of the guys I'd known about what type of price. And $250 seemed to be, it felt like something I could get regularly.
So you returned back to Tri-State at the original Sports Bar on December 4th to defeat J.T. Smith, who we know is going to be the future full-blooded Italian. J.T. was also known to be a risk taker.
He was, yeah. And so JT liked the stuff I'd done in WCW. It seems funny that I only had this 6 months run, but I was seen as something of a star, by the talent in the dressing room. I was seen as something of a veteran, even though I only had the 5 years in at that point. And JT and I had some good matches. I remember that one, as I believe I had the missing top teeth, and that one of the other teeth went through my lip. So I believe there's a photo of me being able to squirt, water or whatever. I may have had a shot of alcohol just for its healing properties. So it may have been a shot of Jack Daniels that I was able to squirt underneath that, through that little puncture wound, and that may have been what gave me the idea for Hell in a Cell when I realized I had the big puncture that I was trying to stick that tongue out through that puncture wound, and it was much bigger. It was a 14-stitch wound to stick it out and wriggle it, and you never saw it wriggling, and it just looked like I was smiling. That's where JR came in with that. By God, they looking at me smiling, and it was a great look. But so the match, it wasn't JT's fault in any way. It's just that, a working punch, if it catches you here and because of the layout of the teeth, you risk a little bit of damage. But I remember that being a good match. I thought it was a good match.
Well, next up is the quarterly show for Joel. It's going to be the Winter Challenge number 2. It's March 2nd from Penn Hall, once again in Philadelphia. This time it's Falls Count Anywhere, and you wrote in your book, it's your favorite match of your career until Beach Blast 92. Meltzer had this to say: Cactus Jack pinned Eddie Gilbert in a brawl all over the building that was said to have been incredible when Eddie's valet, Veronica Lane, threw her shoe to Eddie, but Jack got it and used it. Cactus took crazy bumps and suplexed the table onto GIlbert outside the ring. 4 stars. Suplexing a table onto a guy. Not a guy onto a table onto a guy.
It's so, I don't see why the big guys don't use that regularly.
I love it.
There was one time when Pillman was coming with Kim Woods, strength coach of the Bengals.
Yep.
They came to see me wrestle Chris Candido at Peel's Palace in Erlanger, Kentucky. So I wanted to do something to impress them. So I'm going to suplex the table, and I think Chris was going to move because this was a heavy table. It was a lot. I mean, this isn't a table with folding legs. This is the full wooden table. I get it up to about here, and then I start having trouble with it. And I finally, if Pillman hadn't been there and Kim hadn't been there, I would have given up. And slowly but surely, I got the thing way up in the air. And when I dropped it, it sounded like a
gunshot.
Boom. And thankfully, Chris got out of the way. But that's something I just thought was cool that I hadn't seen anyone do. I ended up using it, multiple times over the years. Not so often that it was predictable, but I'd say I used it 5 or 6 pay-per-views over the course of a career. And I do remember when I think trying to pile drive Eddie on a table, and he backdropped me, and the table breaks, and it wasn't just. It was like boom, the one leg gave way, which was a more dramatic fall.
It felt real.
It felt real because Eddie then tumbled on top of me, and you had the major, double cell.
Even your placement on the table, it was more towards the end, not the middle. So when he backdrops you off, it's not just through the table like you would see a lot in the mid-'90s in the WWF. Yeah. I mean, you're off the thing. It was organic. It felt real. Yeah. And the suspension of disbelief is what we fans really look for, which is probably why so many fans resonated with your stuff, or your stuff resonated with them, because we know they fell on concrete. Some fans think, well, the wrestling ring's like a trampoline. We know that's not true. But a lot of fans are like, all that. Well, he fell on concrete.
Yeah, it's
there's no way to fake that.
I wanted to be that guy, and I touched on this, I think, in the special I did, the Hard Knocks special I did for WWE, where I was the fan who loved seeing moves that made me turn to my friends, whether I was in the arena or on the couch on a Saturday night going, oh, that had to hurt.
Yes.
And I wasn't saying like, all right, the animosity's real. Then there was that other thing where you'd see like Snuka and Morocco.
They really don't like each other.
Yeah, that had to be. I know what wrestling is, but that was real. And so I wanted the moves that would make people say that hurt, and I wanted to be able to suspend disbelief to where people thought, this might be real. This might be real. And so those bumps helped out. And Eddie, by that point, we realized that going in a brawling direction was something that benefited me. Eddie was a great brawler. It's part of your DNA, I think, if you're brought up watching Memphis wrestling.
The Tupelo concession stand brawl had to be something that he wanted to recreate.
Sure. And
this false count anywhere thing, just brawling all over the building became something you saw every weekend on ECW TV. But you didn't really see it a ton in WCW and almost never in the WWF.
Right.
The action stayed inside the barricade at least.
Yeah.
But you doing this felt very Memphis. I assume Eddie this was right up his alley.
Oh, sure. Right? And I should probably give a little credit to Rotten Ron Starr. Rotten Ron Starr was a great hand and a big star in promotions across the country. Never was known on a national basis. But this is a story I told at the StarCast, where I was just trying to put together some things so it'd be a new show. And I'm like, okay, I remember telling my daughter this story because I told Rock Rims that I would write the foreword to Ron's the book that he had written with Ron. And like 2 or 3 months went by with nothing from me, and he was, how about just a blurb? Where a blurb takes about 5 minutes of time as opposed to hours of time to do a good forward. And I thought, am I really going to take everything this guy did for me in '89, given that basically he taught me how to brawl around the building. So it was like a newfound skill for me, and one that I would benefit from greatly. And he was probably making $150 at night, as a respected veteran. So we probably did those brawls around the building five nights. So he made $750, and I had a new lease on life. So Ron was the guy who took me all around the building. This is after Robert Fuller tells me in the car ride on the way over that he's worried about me. I said, why so? He goes, well, I don't think Ron likes me or Jimmy much. Jimmy Golden is Robert Fuller's cousin. Why is that? He goes, well, we broke his neck. Oh, jeez.
Well, there's that.
Double back suplex, a little high on the shoulders and head, breaks his neck. Don't think he's gotten around to forgiving us. Afraid he might. I sound like Foghorn Leghorn.
I love it
when I do it, but that is Robert to an extent, right? It's not a great Robert Fuller, but it's not too far off. And then I'd already heard about Ron Starr breaking bottles over his head in interviews, which I would later go on to borrow from. We all borrow from each other. Jake Roberts said a wise man knows where to steal his material. But I've also heard that he has a handful of lawsuits from beating up fans, and he has flashbacks from Vietnam. So now I'm going to go into the ring with a guy who's angry with me, even if it is, anger redirected, anger at Fuller and Golden. Freud's theory of transference, I believe, is what I was looking for. He's got multiple lawsuits. He breaks bottles over his head, and so I go up to try to talk to him. Hello, Mr. Starr, I'm Cactus Jack. Is there anything you'd like to do out there? And he looks at me and says, I'll see you in the ring.
Oh.
And it's like I got all these factors working against me. And then he and I go out there, and it's just like a fit like a glove. Like, this is where I belonged all along. I'm thinking of a old Kinks song called "This Is Where I Belong." Like, this is exactly where I belong. So when I read that, it took me about 5-6 hours to do a really good forward. I read it to my daughter, and she was so surprised to learn that wrestlers didn't always talk to each other. And she said, Dad, wasn't it difficult to have a match like that? I go, yeah, some of them stunk, no doubt about it. Some of the stuff that we called in the ring stunk. I said, but there are other times where it felt magical. That was the first time I started using the idea of an element of magic being in that ring or in the arena. And the fans have a lot to do with it too. You can't predict it, you can't produce it. And that's why I'm grateful that WWE extends Mania over the course of 2 days, because it's almost impossible to have that element of magic
7 hours in.
7 hours in. So you're practically dooming your main events to being less than they could be, and you're greatly increasing those chances when it's spread over 2 nights. But that's the props to Rotten Ron Starr. So in a way, I'm a veteran. By the time I have this brawl with Eddie Gilbert, I'm a veteran of doing these type of matches, because I'd gone to, say, Guam, with Dick Karakoff, and I'd had these wild matches with Rambo, who was at the time the spitting image of Stallone, to the point where the fans in Guam and Saipan, they thought he was the guy. He would go out there. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Rambo, but he was a table-breaking specialist as well.
Sure.
So he loved doing that stuff, and the matches were wild, and they were believable. So by the time Eddie and I got in there for that match for Joel, I'm not trying to be a babyface. I was never supposed to be. I'm not trying to be Ricky Steamboat with dreadlocks. I'm finding my own groove, and I've got Eddie out there who makes everything I do look as good as possible, and the biggest thing is his belief in me helps me believe in myself. And that's so important in a business where guys are